The gravel crunched under the tires as Mom's car pulled up to the old lakehouse. Oliver stared through the passenger window at the weathered cabin, its brown shingles faded and its porch sagging slightly at one corner. The whole place looked like it belonged in a museum, not like somewhere a 13-year-old was supposed to spend his entire summer. "This is it," Mom said, her voice artificially bright. "Isn't it charming?" Oliver didn't answer. He was too busy checking his tablet for the 100th time, hoping to find even one bar of cell service. Nothing. The screen showed the dreaded no internet connection message that might as well have said, "Welcome to the Stone Age." The screen door squeaked open and Gramps stepped onto the porch. He was exactly as Oliver remembered from Christmas visits. Tall and lean, with silver hair and hands that looked like they'd built half the world. He wore his usual flannel shirt and work boots, even though it was nearly 80 degrees. "There's my grandson," Grant said, walking down the steps. His voice was gruff but warm, like sandpaper over honey. Oliver managed a weak wave, not looking up from his tablet. Behind Gramps, a chocolate Labrador emerged from the cabin, his tail wagging so hard his whole back end wiggled. The dog was old. Oliver could tell by the gray around his muzzle and the careful way he navigated the porch steps, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "Hudson's been waiting for you all morning, haven't you, boy?" Hudson bounded over to Oliver, panting happily and nudging his hand with a wet nose. Oliver jerked his hand away and took a step back. "I'm not really a dog person," Oliver mumbled. Mom shot him a look. "Oliver, be nice. Hudson's been part of the family for years. He's Grandma's dog, was Grandma's dog." An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Mom cleared her throat and popped the trunk. "Well, let's get you settled in. I have to drive back tonight. Early meeting tomorrow." As they carried Oliver's bags into the cabin, the familiar smells hit him like a wave of memories he'd been trying to avoid. Wood polish and pine needles, coffee, and something sweet. Cinnamon rolls, maybe? And underneath it all, the faint scent of the lake itself, that clean, earthy smell of water and growing things. The cabin's main room was just as he remembered. A stone fireplace, mismatched furniture that had seen better decades, and windows that looked out over the lake. Everything was exactly the same, except for the empty rocking chair by the window where Grandma used to sit with her knitting. "Your room's upstairs," Gramps said, leading the way. "Same one you used when you were little." Oliver's room was small but comfortable, with a single bed, a wooden desk, and windows that faced the lake. His tablet immediately started searching for Wi-Fi networks, but of course, there were none. "No internet," Oliver said, not hiding his disappointment. "Nope," Gramps replied cheerfully. "Phone service is spotty too, but there's plenty to do without all that electronic nonsense." Oliver flopped onto the bed and stared at the ceiling. This was going to be the longest summer of his life. Mom stayed for dinner, grilled fish that Gramps had caught that morning, served with corn on the cob and tomatoes from the garden. The conversation was stilted, full of awkward pauses and forced cheerfulness. Hudson lay by Oliver's feet under the table, occasionally resting his chin on Oliver's knee and looking up at him with hopeful brown eyes. After Mom left, waving goodbye from her car with tears in her eyes, Oliver and Gramps sat on the porch listening to the cicadas buzz in the trees. The lake stretched out before them, dark and still in the evening light. "She's worried about you," Gramps said finally. "I'm fine," Oliver shrugged. "Didn't say you weren't," Gramps rocked slowly in his chair. "But losing someone you love, that's something you don't get over quick." Oliver's throat tightened. He'd been doing fine until Gramps brought it up. "I don't want to talk about it." "Fair enough." Gramps stood and stretched. "I'll be up early tomorrow, working on the dock. You can sleep in if you want." As Gramps headed inside, Hudson patted over the Oliver's chair and sat down, leaning against his legs. For a moment, Oliver felt the urge to pet him, to run his fingers through that soft brown fur, but instead he stood up abruptly. "Come on, dog. Time to go inside." Hudson's tail drooped slightly, but he followed Oliver into the cabin and up the stairs. At the top, the dog paused and looked back at Oliver hopefully. "You don't sleep in my room," Oliver said firmly. Hudson's ears drooped, but he padded down the hall to what Oliver assumed was Gramps' room. Oliver closed his bedroom door and tried to ignore the guilty feeling in his stomach. Oliver woke to the sound of hammering. Through his window, he could see Gramps down at the dock, replacing some of the weathered boards. Hudson was lying in the shade nearby, watching every move. The cicadas were already buzzing, even though it was barely 8 o'clock. Oliver checked his tablet. Still no internet, and the battery was down to 30%. He'd have to start conserving power if he wanted it to last the whole summer. Downstairs, Gramps had left a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table, along with a note. "Gone to town for supplies. Back by lunch. Hudson's been fed. Gramps." Oliver ate in silence, occasionally glancing out the window at the lake. It was pretty, he had to admit. The water was like glass, reflecting the pine trees and the mountains beyond. A loon called from somewhere across the water, its voice echoing off the hills. After breakfast, Oliver wandered around the cabin looking for something to do. He found a shelf of old books, mostly mystery novels and outdoor magazines, and a closet full of board games with missing pieces. In the living room, framed photos covered the mantel. Gramps in his Marine uniform, family vacations, and lots of pictures of Grandma. In one photo, she was holding a tiny chocolate puppy, Hudson probably, when he was just a baby. Grandma was laughing, her silver hair catching the sunlight, and the puppy was licking her face. Oliver touched the frame gently, remembering how Grandma used to smell like vanilla, and how she always had butterscotch candies in her pocket. A soft whine made him turn around. Hudson was sitting in the doorway, something in his mouth. He walked over to Oliver and dropped it at his feet. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "What's this, old man?" Oliver muttered, picking up the note. The handwriting was familiar, Grandma's careful script, all loops and flourishes. Oliver unfolded the paper and read, "My dearest treasure hunter, if you're reading this, then Hudson has done his job. Here's your first clue to find what's hidden near. Look for the place where morning light dances on water, where an old friend waits to take you across the way. The next clue rests where fishermen cast their dreams. Happy hunting. Love always. Grandma." Oliver stared at the note, his heart beating faster. This was definitely Grandma's handwriting, but how had Hudson known to bring it to him? And what was all this about treasure hunting? Hudson sat patiently, his tail wagging slightly, as if he knew Oliver was working through a puzzle. "Did you know Grandma wrote this?" Oliver asked the dog. Hudson barked once and headed toward the door, looking back at Oliver expectantly. "You want me to follow you?" Another bark, more insistent this time. Oliver folded the note and put it in his pocket. He had nothing else to do, and despite himself, he was curious. "Okay, lead the way." Hudson bounded out the door and down the path toward the lake. Oliver followed, reading the clue again as he walked. Where morning light dances on water, where an old friend waits to take you across the way. The dock. It had to be the dock, and the old friend was probably the canoe that Gramps kept tied there. Sure enough, Hudson led him straight to the dock. The dog ran to the end and sat beside the canoe, his tail beating against the wooden planks. "Where fishermen cast their dreams," Oliver read aloud. He looked around the dock, searching for anything that might hide a clue. Under the bench where Gramps kept his fishing gear? No, nothing there. Behind the life jackets? Empty. Then he noticed a small gap between two dock boards, just wide enough for a folded piece of paper. Oliver knelt and worked his fingers into the crack. His fingertips touched something papery. Got it. He pulled out another note, this one tied with a faded ribbon. Hudson barked approvingly and wagged his tail. Oliver unfolded the second note. Well done, detective! Your next adventure awaits where the forest meets the sky, where an old oak stands guard over memories and a heart was once carved deep in bark. Look for the hollow where squirrels store their gold. The treasure hunt continues. Love always, Grandma. Oliver looked up at Hudson, who was watching him with bright, intelligent eyes. You know where this is too, don't you? Hudson stood and trotted off the dock, heading toward the trail that led into the woods. Oliver followed, his tablet forgotten in his pocket. For the first time since arriving at the lake house, he felt genuinely interested in something, inspired even. The trail wound through tall pines and maples, dappled with sunlight that filtered through the leaves. Hudson moved with surprising energy for an old dog, his nose occasionally dropping to the ground to check a scent before continuing on. About a quarter-mile into the woods, they reached a small clearing where a massive oak tree stood. Its trunk was easily 6 feet across, and its branches spread out like a green umbrella. On the side facing the trail, someone had carved a heart in the bark years ago. The edges were weathered and grown over, but Oliver could still make out the initials inside. JM plus MK. James and Margaret, Gramps and Grandma. Hudson was already sniffing around the base of the tree, his tail wagging softly. He pawed at a hollow in the roots, and Oliver knelt beside him. Inside the hollow, wrapped in a plastic bag, was another note. This one was longer, written on both sides of the paper. My sweetest Oliver, if you've made it this far, then you're starting to understand the magic of this place. Your grandfather and I spent so many happy hours here, especially in the early days when we were just getting to know each other. This tree has seen all our seasons: spring picnics, summer reading sessions, autumn leaf peeping, and winter snowshoe adventures. But the real treasure isn't hidden in a tree or under a dock. It's in the stories, the memories, and the love that fills every corner of this lake. Hudson knows this better than anyone. He's been the keeper of our joy for so many years. Your next clue waits where the sun sets behind the mountains, where an old stump holds court over the water, and evening reflections tell stories of their own. Look for the place where peace comes to rest. Keep exploring, my dear one. Love always, Grandma. Oliver felt tears prick his eyes. He could almost hear Grandma's voice reading the words, gentle and full of love. Hudson pressed against his leg, as if sensing his emotion. She really loved this place, didn't she? Oliver said softly. Hudson whined gently and licked Oliver's hand. This time, Oliver didn't pull away. Over the next few days, Oliver found himself looking forward to Hudson's visits. Every morning, the old dog would appear with another note, and every day brought a new adventure. They explored the entire perimeter of the lake, following clues that led to hidden spots Oliver had never noticed before. One clue led them to a beaver dam on the far side of the lake, where Grandma had hidden a note describing the time she and Gramps had watched a mother duck teach her ducklings to swim. Another took them to a rocky outcrop where they'd once seen a family of deer drinking at the water's edge. With each discovery, Oliver found himself asking Gramps more questions. What was it like when he first brought Grandma to the lake? How had they met? What were their favorite things to do together? Gramps seemed surprised by Oliver's sudden interest, but he was happy to share stories. They talked while fixing the dock, while preparing meals, while sitting on the porch in the evening. Oliver learns that Gramps had been incredibly shy as a young man, and that Grandma had been the one to pursue him. He learned that they'd built much of the cabin themselves, working on it every summer for years. She was the brave one, Gramps said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and pink. "I was always worried about doing things wrong, but she just dove right in. Life's too short to play it safe," she used to say. Hudson lay between them, his head on Oliver's feet. Over the past few days, the dog had become Oliver's constant companion. He no longer slept in Gramps' room. Instead, he curled up on a blanket beside Oliver's bed, and Oliver found the soft sound of his breathing comforting. "Why didn't she ever have kids?" Oliver asked. Gramps was quiet for a long moment. "She wanted to. We both did. But sometimes life doesn't work out the way you plan. She used to say, you were the son she never had, though. When you were little, she'd spend hours planning activities for your visits." Oliver remembered those visits differently now. He'd always thought the scavenger hunts and nature walks were just ways to keep him busy, but now he realized they were Grandma's way of sharing the things she loved most. "I miss her," Oliver said quietly. "Me too, kiddo. Me too." The next morning, Hudson appeared with what looked like the final clue. This note was different from the others. Thicker paper, sealed with wax, and tied with blue ribbon. "My dearest Oliver, you've reached the end of our little adventure, but I hope it's really just the beginning. There's one more treasure to find, but this one is special. It's not hidden in a tree or under a rock. It's been with you all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Hudson knows where it is. Trust him completely. And remember, some treasures are worth more than gold. All my love, today and always, Grandma." Oliver looked at Hudson, who was already heading toward the cabin. But instead of going inside, the dog walked around to the back where a small garden grew behind the kitchen. He stopped at a particular spot and began digging with his front paws. "What are you doing, boy?" Oliver knelt beside him and helped move the dirt. A few inches down, his fingers hit something hard and smooth, a metal box about the size of a shoebox. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a photograph and a journal. The photograph showed Grandma kneeling in the snow, holding a tiny chocolate puppy. She was much younger, maybe in her 50s, and she was laughing as the puppy licked her face. On the back, someone had written, "Margaret and Hudson, first day home, December 1995. The journal was in Gramps' writing, but it was dated from years ago. December 15th, 1995. Found a stray puppy today, half frozen by the road. Margaret insisted we bring him in, even though I said we didn't need a dog. She needs us," she said. "And maybe we need him too." She's right, of course. She's always right about these things. The little guy has been following her around all day, and I've caught her sneaking him treats from the dinner table. She's already named him Hudson, after the river where we had our first date. I've never been much for pets, but there's something about the way he looks at her like she's the center of his world. Maybe that's what I love about him. He sees her the way I do. I suppose we're a family now. Margaret, me, and Hudson. It's not what I expected, but it's perfect. Note to self, buy dog food tomorrow, and maybe a proper dog bed, though I suspect he'll end up sleeping on ours. Oliver read the entry aloud, his voice catching on the words. Hudson sat beside him, his muzzle resting on Oliver's knee, his brown eyes full of understanding. "He found you," Oliver said softly. "Gramps found you, and you found each other." Hudson's tail thumped against the ground. There were more entries in the journal, documenting Hudson's growth from a tiny puppy to a loyal companion. Stories of adventures, of quiet moments, of the way Hudson had filled their lives with joy and laughter. The final entry was dated just a few months ago. "Hudson is getting old. The vet says he might have another year or two, but I can see it in his eyes. He's tired. He's been the best friend a man could ask for, and I know Grandma would be proud of the dog he became. I worry about what will happen when he's gone. This place will be so quiet without him. But for now, I'm grateful for every day we have together. He's taught me that love isn't about how long you have with someone. It's about how deeply you let them into your heart. If Oliver ever wants to take him, I think Hudson would like that. He's always been good with kids, and maybe it's time for him to have a new adventure. Margaret would have wanted him to be with family." Oliver looked up at Gramps, who was standing nearby, his hands shoved deep in his pockets.
You were going to give him to me anyway, Oliver said. Gramps nodded. If you wanted him, but I figured you might not be ready. Oliver buried his face in Hudson's fur, breathing in the warm, comforting scent. I'm ready. The rest of the summer passed in a blur of adventures. Oliver and Hudson explored every trail around the lake, sometimes with Gramps, sometimes on their own. They went fishing in the early morning, played fetch in the afternoon, and sat on the dock in the evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Oliver's tablet lay forgotten on his bedside table, its battery long dead. He didn't miss it. Instead, he filled his time with real adventures. Catching fireflies, identifying bird calls, learning to paddle the canoe without tipping it over. Hudson was his constant companion, always ready for the next adventure. Despite his age, the old dog seemed to have found new energy. He bounded through the woods with the enthusiasm of a puppy, his tail wagging as he led Oliver to new discoveries. One afternoon, as they sat on the dock sharing a peanut butter sandwich, Oliver made a decision. I want to hide new clues, he told Gramps, for next summer, so we can do the treasure hunt again. Gramps smiled. I think that's a fine idea. Hudson would like that. They spent the next week writing new clues and hiding them around the lake. Oliver wrote about the places he'd discovered, the things he'd learned, and the peace he'd found in the quiet moments. He wrote about the way morning mist rose from the water, about the sound of loons calling in the distance, about the feeling of Hudson's warm weight against his feet as they sat on the porch. On the last night of summer, they had a small ceremony. Gramps built a fire in the stone fireplace, and they sat around it with Hudson stretched out between them. Oliver read his favorite parts of Grandma's notes out loud, and Gramps shared stories about the early days of their marriage. She would have loved watching you two together, Gramps said, scratching Hudson behind his ears. This place always needs young voices to keep it alive. Same time next year, Oliver asked. Wouldn't miss it. You and Hudson have got a standing invitation. The next morning, Mom arrived to pick up Oliver. She was amazed by the change in him. He stood straighter, smiled more easily, and talked excitedly about all the things he'd discovered. And this is Hudson, Oliver said, introducing the dog who stood patiently by his side. He's coming home with us. Mom looked uncertain. Oliver, I don't know if we're ready for a dog. Please, Mom, he needs me, and I need him. Something in Oliver's voice must have convinced her because she nodded slowly. I suppose we could give it a try. As they loaded the car, Oliver knelt beside Hudson and whispered, Ready for a new adventure, boy? Hudson licked his face and wagged his tail, his brown eyes bright with anticipation.
5 years later. The lake house looked exactly the same as Oliver remembered it, but somehow it felt different. Maybe it was because he was older now, or maybe it was because he wasn't arriving alone. Uncle Oliver, is that where the treasure is buried? Asked Emma, his 8-year-old cousin, pointing toward the woods. Some of it, Oliver said, grinning, but the real treasure is harder to find than that. Behind him, his younger cousins piled out of the car, chattering with excitement. They'd been begging for months to come to the lake, especially after Oliver had told them about the treasure hunt. Gramps appeared on the porch, looking older but still strong. Beside him stood a young golden retriever, her tail wagging frantically. Meet Sunny, Gramps called out. She's still learning the ropes, but she's got potential. Oliver walked over to a large oak tree near the cabin, where a carved wooden plaque had been mounted at eye level. It read, In memory of Hudson, the keeper of joy. He taught us that healing doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes on 4 paws. Emma read the plaque out loud, her voice careful and serious. Who was Hudson? He was the best dog who ever lived, and he taught me that love isn't something you lose when someone dies. It's something you carry with you forever. The kids gathered around as Oliver began to tell them about Hudson, about the treasure hunt, about the summer that had changed his life. As he spoke, Sunny listened intently, her head tilted as if she understood every word. Later that evening, as the family sat on the porch watching the sunset,
Oliver felt a familiar presence. Not Hudson, he would never be replaced, but something warm and comforting that seemed to flow from the lake itself, from the trees, from the very air around them. "He's still here, isn't he?" Emma whispered. Oliver nodded. "In all the good things, in the way the lake looks in the morning, in the sound of loons calling, in the feeling you get when you help someone you love." As if on cue, Sunny patted over with something in her mouth. It was a folded piece of paper, new and crisp. "What's this?" Emma asked, taking the note. Oliver smiled. "Why don't you open it and see?" Emma unfolded the paper and read aloud. "My dearest treasure hunters, if you're reading this, then the adventure is about to begin." The children's eyes lit up with excitement, and Oliver felt his heart swell with joy. Hudson was gone, but his spirit lived on in every new adventure, every moment of wonder, every connection made between hearts that needed healing. Some treasures, Oliver had learned, were worth more than gold. And some heroes never really leave. They just find new ways to share their gifts with the world. The lake sparkled in the fading light, and somewhere in the distance, a loon called out across the water, its voice carrying the timeless message that love, once given, never truly ends.